My name is Gwyneth, and at the age of 32, I thought I had already made up my mind. 2 years ago, when I got a promotion at work, everything seemed to fall into place. The salary increase was significant enough that I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief, pay the mortgage, live comfortably, and even help others. That's when I decided to start supporting my parents financially. "Gwyneth, honey, you don't have to do this," Mom said when I first told her about setting up monthly transfers. "Mom, I want to. I'm making good money now and I can help," I replied, already pulling out my phone to set up an automatic payment of $1,500 in my banking app. Dad was standing next to me, his eyes were shining, and I thought it was gratitude. "We raised a good Sarah," he said to his mother, putting his arm around her shoulders. I smiled. Those first few months were touching. Every time the money was credited to their account, they called to thank me. Mom kept saying how lucky they were to have such a caring daughter, and Dad joked that they now had a sugar daughter instead of a sugar daddy. We laughed, and I was glad that I could help the people who raised me. But you know, as they say, no good deed goes unpunished. And I was going to learn that lesson the hard way. It all started small. Thank you calls became less frequent, and then stopped altogether. At first, I didn't mind. It became routine, and what's the big deal? I continued to send money without expecting anything in return. But then the request started. "Gwyneth, honey," Mom called one day, "our coffee maker just broke down. You should have heard the noise it was making. We thought maybe you could help us buy a new one." "Of course," I said, without even thinking. "It's just a coffee maker, right?" But then the iron appeared. And then the washing machine. Each request was bigger than the previous one, and each one was accompanied by more and more detailed stories about why they needed it right now. I still remember the day when I finally spoke. I had just finished a particularly stressful week at work when my mom called and said she wanted a new smart TV. "I need you to understand something," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I don't print money in my basement, I earn it. And while I like helping you, I think we need to slow down the shopping." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I see," Mom finally said. Her voice was icy. "Well, I wouldn't want to burden you with our needs." The line ended before I could answer. The silence that followed this conversation was unlike anything I had experienced with my family before. Weeks passed without a single call or message from my parents. The traditional Sunday dinners I grew up eating suddenly stopped, and my invitations went unanswered. Thank God for my sister Amy. At 27, she had just married her longtime boyfriend James in a beautiful ceremony that I helped pay for. Now she has become my only window into the world of our parents during these quiet months. "You won't believe this," Amy said during one of our phone calls, barely able to contain her laughter. "Mom and Dad are acting like you've committed some terrible crime. They keep telling you how you left them just because you didn't buy them a TV." "The TV?" I couldn't help but laugh too. "You might think I refused to donate a kidney or something." "I know, right?" Amy exhaled, calming down a little. "But you know how they can be. Do you remember when I didn't call them for 3 days on my honeymoon? Mom acted like I'd moved to Mars." I rolled my eyes, but a strange feeling suddenly stirred up inside me. Yes, I resented them for this silence, for their unfair treatment of me after so many years of help, but still they were my parents. We hadn't spoken in months, and the approaching Thanksgiving seemed like a good reason to finally put an end to this ridiculous Cold War. Armed with a homemade apple pie, Dad's favorite, and carefully selected gifts, I showed up on their doorstep without warning. The moment my mom opened the door, I saw real conflict in her eyes. An old pain was fighting with the natural maternal instinct to invite me into the house. She hesitated for only a moment, but that moment was enough for me to feel alarmed. Then Dad appeared behind her, and after looking at me, he finally nodded, as if he had made a decision for both of them. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. Amy and James were already sitting in the living room, and the atmosphere was tense, but only for the first few minutes. Then, over the turkey and stuffing, the conversation finally flowed easier than I expected. The laughter returned, the memories filled the silence, and for a while it even seemed to me that everything was back to normal. That's when Dad cleared his throat and threw what seemed like a small but exciting bomb. We thought. He looked around the table, as if assessing our reactions. What if we all go to Europe early next year? To Germany, for example, after Christmas? Mom's eyes lit up immediately, and she nodded happily. Oh, yes. We've already discussed this with Amy and James. Gwyneth, you should go too. It would be so wonderful to get the whole family together. I sat with my fork halfway to my mouth, digesting this unexpected news. Despite our recent rift, the idea of a family trip to Europe seemed incredibly tempting to me. I imagined us walking through the narrow streets of Munich, tasting hot mulled wine at Christmas markets, and laughing at another of Dad's jokes. Isn't that what I wanted? To restore the lost connection? After a few minutes of mentally checking my calendar, I nodded. That sounds great. I wouldn't mind a vacation. We spent the rest of the evening discussing potential routes, and Mom even took out her iPad to show us some of the tourist spots she had explored. For the first time in months, we were a real family again, and on the way home, I felt the lightness I'd been missing. The next day, I asked for 2 weeks off at work, and every day my anticipation of the trip only grew. I resumed the tradition of Sunday dinners, and every week we spent hours discussing the details of our future adventure. December has arrived, shrouded in a blanket of snow and the promise of a holiday. I spent the weekend choosing Christmas presents, deciding that this year should be special, especially after the recent reconciliation. I bought an expensive cashmere sweater for my mom, the one she had been looking at for a long time, but never decided to buy. Dad got the latest model of his favorite smartwatch. I chose a high-quality coffee machine for Amy and James, knowing how they like to start the day with a fragrant espresso. When Christmas Eve finally arrived, I ordered a taxi and headed to my parents', my hands full of carefully wrapped gifts. The house looked really festive. The windows were flickering with warm light, and there was an elaborately decorated wreath on the front door. I smiled. The last few months may have been difficult, but today, on this magical evening, everything should be different. Amy's car was already parked in the driveway. Merry Christmas, I said, climbing the steps, confident that this evening would go the way I dreamed. Mom greeted me with a hug that was almost like the good old days, warm, a little longer than usual, but still with a subtle hint of restraint, as if she was still weighing whether she was ready to finally forgive me for that unfortunate TV story. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine freshness, and the Christmas tree, decorated with familiar toys that we had collected over the years, twinkled in the soft light of the garlands, creating the illusion of comfort and family harmony. I inhaled that scent, full of childhood memories, and allowed myself to believe for a moment that tonight would pass without unpleasant surprises. The gift exchange started quite well. My presents were greeted with joyful exclamations and grateful smiles. Mom immediately unwrapped a cashmere sweater, hugged it to her chest, and noticed that she had been dreaming about this for a long time. Dad looked at the smartwatch with interest, trying to figure out the functions, and Amy and James were sincerely delighted with the coffee machine, enthusiastically discussing which types of coffee they could now taste. At home, however, I couldn't help but notice that their gifts to me were chosen without much attention: an ordinary scarf, obviously bought at the last minute, and a gift card to a store that I almost never went to. I forced myself to smile, thank them, and reminded myself that Christmas is not about material things, but about love and family unity. After a few glasses of wine at dinner, the atmosphere began to change. Mom kept giving Dad meaningful glances, the ones that always foreshadowed a conversation I probably didn't want to hear. Amy and James, usually so talkative, suddenly became unusually focused on their plates, as if they were studying the pattern on the porcelain. I knew this moment, the calm before the storm. So, Gwyneth, Mom finally spoke. Her voice sounded sweet, a little sweeter than usual, as always when she was trying to convince me of something that I shouldn't like. We discussed our trip to Europe. I nodded, waiting to hear what new places of interest they had decided to include in the itinerary, but what came next hit me like a bucket of icy water. We found an amazing package deal for all 5 of us, Mom continued, her voice still soft, sweet, and enveloping like syrup. And because you're doing so well at work. I was wary. We thought it would be wise if you paid for the trip for everyone. My glass of wine froze halfway to my lips. I'm sorry, what? I looked at Dad, hoping that maybe I had misheard, but he just nodded in confirmation of Mom's words. Honey, you now earn a lot more than Amy, James, your mom, and I combined, he said in a tone as if it were an indisputable fact that I had to immediately agree with. We're retired. I set the glass down on the table a little more insistently than I should have and frowned. Wait, are you seriously asking me to pay for a European vacation for 5 people? We're not asking, Mom corrected calmly, looking at me over the rim of her wine glass. We have already decided that this is how it should be. You can afford it. I looked at Amy, hoping that at least she would support me, that at least she would tell me how absurd this was, but my sister just shrugged her shoulders slightly and said with feigned nonchalance. We've really discussed this, and, it makes sense. Gwyneth, you have a big salary. I felt irritation begin to build up in my chest, as the warmth left my body, leaving behind only a cold, ringing void. This is crazy, I said, pushing a lock of hair out of my face and looking at everyone in turn. I will gladly pay for my trip, but I am not going to finance a European vacation for the whole family. Do you have any idea how much it will cost? Don't be selfish, Gwyneth. Mom's voice became tougher, and the sweet politeness in it finally evaporated. I laughed incredulously. Selfish? I've been sending you $1,500 every month for 2 years. I helped pay for Amy's wedding. I bought you all the appliances you asked for. How does this make me selfish? The temperature in the room seemed to plummet by several degrees. Mom stood up, her face flushed, either from anger or wine, or maybe both. If you're not ready to help your family go through this experience together, then you can just leave, she said, pointing to the door. We don't need selfish people at the Christmas table. I looked at Dad, looking for some kind of support, but he just nodded calmly, agreeing with Mom. Your mother is right, he said in a flat, emotionless voice. If you don't contribute properly to the family, maybe you really should leave. I swallowed, feeling my chest tighten with pain. I looked at Amy, hoping she would say something, but she just sat there in silence, just like James, with her eyes on her plate, as if the whole scene had nothing to do with her. The betrayal hurt more than all the words they said. The taxi ride home that Christmas night was a blur of tears and anger. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cold glass, watching the blurred lights of the street stretch out in an endless ribbon, and a feeling of emptiness swirled inside me, mixed with boiling rage. How could they do this to me? How did things get so far that my own family considered it normal to demand that I pay for their luxury vacation, and when I refused, they simply threw me out of their lives as an unnecessary thing? By the time I got to my apartment, there were no tears or doubts left inside me, just cold determination. I silently took off my coat, sat down on the sofa, took out my phone and, with shaking fingers, opened the banking application. My heart was pounding, but I didn't allow myself to hesitate. A couple of taps and regular monthly transfers to Mom's account are canceled. I took a deep breath, and then, as if putting the last point, typed a short message. Monthly transfers have been canceled. Merry Christmas. The answer came almost immediately, and even before I opened it, I already knew what I would see. It just proves what we already knew. You're selfish and greedy. Don't worry about contacting us anymore. I reread these words over and over again, feeling a new wave of pain rise in my chest, but with it a strange feeling of liberation. If this is the price for not allowing yourself to be used anymore, then maybe it's not that high. I spent the rest of the night alternately crying and angry at myself, at them, at the whole situation, which turned from an ordinary desire to help my family into an absurd spectacle in which my value was measured solely by the amounts I could send every month. At what point did my generosity stop being a gesture of love and become a duty, and then a requirement altogether? The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Getting out of bed, I poured myself a cup of strong coffee, sat down at my laptop and started looking for travel packages, but not to Germany, but to Hawaii. I deserved a vacation, I deserved joy, but if I was going to spend thousands of dollars on a vacation, it would be on my own terms. A few hours later, I had my e-tickets in my hands, 2 weeks at a luxury beach resort in February, a room with an ocean view, surfing lessons, and island tours. If I'm going to invest in someone's vacation, I muttered to myself, at least let that someone be me. The following weeks were eerily quiet. No calls from mom or dad, no messages from Amy, no attempt to get in touch. It was as if I had been deleted from the family history, as an unnecessary chapter. I threw myself into my work, planning my solo trip, and avoided social media, knowing that I would surely see photos of their European adventure and wasn't sure how I would react to it. But one February evening, when my flight was only a few days away, curiosity got the better of me, and I opened Amy's Instagram. The photos appeared immediately, a happy, beaming family against the background of the Brandenburg Gate, walks through the snow-covered streets of Munich, dinners in cozy beer gardens, glasses of golden beer, plates of crispy sausages and potatoes. They looked happy, relaxed, as if nothing had happened, as if I had never existed in their world. I didn't know what to feel, relief that I wasn't a part of this performance, or bitterness that I was replaced so easily. While they were posting photos from Berlin, I boarded a plane bound for Honolulu. When I stepped onto the warm Hawaiian sand, inhaled the salty ocean air and felt the sun warming my skin, I suddenly realized that I had made the right choice. I lived in paradise for 2 weeks. I got up at dawn, took surfing lessons, wandered along the green trails leading to waterfalls, tasted local cuisine, enjoyed walks under the stars and, for the first time in many years, really rested. Without guilt. Without imposed obligations. Without endless demands disguised as requests. I met people who were lonely travelers like me, listened to their stories, shared my own, laughed, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in so long. "It feels like you're taking a weight off your shoulders," said Lisa, a woman I met in yoga classes. I smiled as I looked at the sunset turning the sky shades of pink and orange. Whatever you left behind, it was the right choice. She had no idea how right she was. Gwyneth, who boarded the plane home, was a completely different woman than the one who flew to this island. I felt stronger, more confident in my boundaries, and finally came to terms with the idea that moving away from a toxic family was not a betrayal, but an act of self-preservation. But life is a funny thing. She likes to test your resolve at the exact moment when you think you've finally found peace. It's been a month since I returned from Hawaii. My tan started to fade, but the feeling of freedom I found there was still with me. I returned to work, and for the first time in a long time, I felt satisfied, fully immersed in projects, enjoying what I was doing. But one day, when I was sitting in the office, poring over documents, my phone vibrated. The number was familiar. Too familiar. One word appeared on the screen: Mom. I started going to pottery classes in the evening, and to my surprise, I liked it. There was something peaceful about sitting at a pottery wheel, feeling how soft clay gave under my fingers, taking the shape that I give it. I also joined a book club, and our weekly meetings over a cup of tea, discussing the stories I've read, and arguing about characters and motives have become something of a new family tradition for me. Life without the constant family dramas was surprisingly pleasant. There were no unexpected requests, hidden demands, emotional blackmail, just my own space, my own time, my own freedom. But then, one of the usual Wednesdays, in the evening, when I had just returned home after class, the phone rang. I glanced at the screen and froze. The name Mom flashed among the notifications, like a ghost of the past, from which I tried so hard to isolate myself. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling my heart stop for a moment, and then start beating faster again. We hadn't spoken since that Christmas dinner, the night she'd actually kicked me out the door, calling me selfish, and to be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted to interrupt that streak of silence. But something about this call, its suddenness, its persistence, the very fact that she called herself, despite her pride and stubbornness, aroused my curiosity. I took a deep breath and pressed the answer button. "Hi," she tried to keep her tone neutral. "Gwyneth," my mother's voice sounded like I'd never heard it before. Tense, strangled, as if struggling through a lump in his throat. "We need you to come." "You are welcome." My body tensed. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea." "Please," she interrupted, and there was something in her voice that made my stomach turn cold. Fear. Real fear. I should have said no. I had every right to say no. After everything they'd done, after they'd thrown me out of their lives for the sake of money, I didn't have to answer that call. But I heard myself talking. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. The ride to their house seemed longer than usual. My mind was racing from one assumption to another. Is someone sick? Did something happen to Amy? Or is this just another attempt to get money out of me? But Mom's voice, it didn't sound like the voice of a woman who just needed to beat something out of her daughter. He sounded scared. When I drove up to their house, the first thing that alerted me was how it looked. Previously, the neatly manicured lawn was overgrown, and the bushes, which Dad always carefully trimmed, seemed abandoned, as if they hadn't been touched in months. The house itself looked darker than usual, and, even more alarming, Dad's beloved car had disappeared from its usual spot in the driveway. I hadn't even knocked and the door opened abruptly and my mom appeared in front of me. She looked older, with deep shadows under her eyes and a hunched posture that instantly erased her usual image of a domineering, confident woman. I entered the house, and the first thing that caught my eye was Dad sitting in his armchair in the living room, staring into space. He didn't even turn his head, didn't try to say hello, didn't offer me a drink, as usual. "What's going on?" I asked, standing in the doorway. Mom looked away. "Where's your car?" I asked, looking at my father. He slowly raised his head, and a shadow of shame flashed in his eyes. "We had to sell it." I blinked, trying to make sense of those words. "Sell it? Why?" At that moment, my mother burst into tears, covering her face with her hands, and the very sound of it increased the anxiety inside me. "This is Amy and James." She sobbed, her voice breaking, her hands clenching into fists as she tried to pull herself together. "When we were in Germany, they went to Baden-Baden, took my credit card." I frowned. "You thought they were just sightseeing, but..." "They went to the casino," Mom finished and put her hand over her mouth, as if she felt physically ill from these words. My stomach clenched painfully. "How much?" Dad looked at me with an expression I couldn't identify, a mixture of shame, anger, and exhaustion. "Almost $50,000 in 2 days." There was silence in the room. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. 50,000? I asked, as if I couldn't believe I'd heard it right. "Credit card limit," Mom whispered. "Plus cash advances." We didn't even know until we got home and saw the bank statement. "But it's a scam. You can dispute the costs." "No, we can't," Dad replied dully. "We gave Amy permission to use the card in an emergency." "An emergency?" There was indignation in my voice. "And that's not all," Mom added softly. The next half hour was like watching a horror movie. The parents took turns telling how, after their return from Germany, they received a call from the bank, how they began to figure it out, and the truth they revealed turned out to be even scarier. James was a gambling addict. He gambled for years, hiding it even from those closest to him, losing huge sums, but pretending to be a successful person until the last moment. But what was even worse? He dragged Amy into this, Mom whispered, crumpling the napkin in her hands. We had no idea. She seemed so happy with him, and we didn't even notice. I sat there feeling dizzy. They're both in debt now. James lost his job and was fired as soon as the company found out about his addiction. Now they have nothing. I ran my hand over my face, trying to process this flood of information somehow. I came here expecting another manipulation, another request for money, but the reality turned out to be much more chaotic, gloomy, and destructive. My sister is a practical, sensible, always collected Amy, the one who once proudly told me about her career plans, how she and James want to create a stable, well-off family, the one who sided with her parents at Christmas, demanding that I pay for their European holidays. Now she was drowning in gambling debts. Why are you telling me all this? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Mom leaned forward, her eyes glistening with tears, but now I was no longer sure if they were tears of remorse or pain. Rather, they were tears of despair, the tears of a person who realized that he was on the edge of a precipice and was now desperately looking for something to hold on to so as not to fall down. Gwyneth, honey, we need help. Her voice was trembling. Her hands were nervously clutching the hem of her sweater, as if this could somehow make a difference. The bank requires its money. We are retired. We do not have such funds. No, I said, and the word came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften it, didn't try to smooth out the corners. Absolutely not. But we're your parents. Mom's voice got louder, almost hysterical. You have to help us. Should I? I got up from my seat, feeling anger boiling inside, but this time it wasn't uncontrollable, it wasn't painful, it was the cold, detached anger of a person who finally saw the situation for what it is, without illusions and hopes. I have to, because what? Because you thought I was your personal ATM? Because I didn't pay for your vacation, and you cut me out of the family? Is it because my duty is to save adults from the consequences of their own decisions? Mom clutched the armrest of the chair. Her lips were trembling, but I couldn't tell if it was fear of the future or fear that she was losing her last chance to influence me. You have to do this because you're our daughter, Dad's voice came, quiet but firm. And because Amy is your sister. She's a family. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Where was that family loyalty when you all turned on me at Christmas? Where was she when Amy just sat there and watched you kick me out? Why is family only when you need something from me? Mom burst into tears again, but now it didn't touch me. Please, Gwyneth, she whispered, not looking at me. We don't know what to do. Your sister and James are in big trouble. They may lose their home. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm so as not to slip into anger. Have you ever thought that maybe they need to face the consequences of their actions? That saving them from debt won't teach them anything. So you're just going to make your family suffer? Mom exclaimed, but there were no more traces of tears on her face. The tears evaporated as quickly as they had appeared, giving way to something more familiar, pure, unbridled anger. I shook my head, feeling strangely, almost peaceful. No, Mom, I said in a flat voice. I'll let my family sort out their problems. Amy and James need professional help to deal with their addiction, not just another check from me that will allow them to continue behaving the same way. And you and Dad should understand that your retirement savings are not a rescue fund for someone's gambling. Get out. Mom screamed, rising abruptly from her chair, and in this scream there was almost word for word a repetition of the scene that played out at Christmas. "Get out if you're not helping us." Dad just sat next to her in silence, not stopping her, not objecting, not protecting me. I stood up slowly, feeling a sudden surge of relief inside me. You know what's funny? I picked up my bag and headed for the door. I came here tonight worried that something terrible had happened. I stopped for a moment, looked at them, so alien, so far away, and shook my head. I think something terrible really happened. It's just not quite what I expected. I left the house feeling the cold air envelop my face, but inside I was warm. As I walked to the car, I could hear my mom continuing to cry, and my dad mumbling something, trying to calm her down. Even before I got home, my phone vibrated. Amy. I didn't even open the message, but I caught a glimpse of the first lines. "Gwyneth, please forgive me. We just need this one chance. We will change." I blocked her number. In the following weeks, my parents also tried to get in touch. A stream of missed calls, desperate voicemails full of attempts at emotional blackmail, phrases like, "How can you do this to your own mother? Don't we deserve forgiveness? You're just abandoning your family." I ignored them all. But Amy moved on. When I blocked her number, she started creating new ones. She sent messages from different accounts, wrote me emails, asked me to listen to her, promised that everything would change, that she was sincerely sorry, that she was blinded by love for James, that she did not understand what she had gotten herself into, that they would pay me back, that she was ready to do anything till I gave her another chance. But I already knew the value of these promises. And for the first time in my life, instead of being torn between guilt and a desire to help, I felt calm. I didn't answer. My mother brought all possible relatives to this situation, hoping to put pressure on me with their help. Aunt Linda left me several voice messages full of disappointment and reproachful phrases like, "Family must support each other no matter what." Uncle Robert emphatically said in another message that, "Someday you will also find yourself in a difficult situation and regret turning away from your family." And my cousin Allison's sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in over a year, sent me a long message about the importance of forgiveness and compassion, clearly written at my mother's dictation. Dad even showed up at my workplace. Fortunately, the guards wouldn't let him on my floor, but I was told that he strongly asked me to tell them that everything can be fixed if you just make the right choice, and although I was no longer so easily knocked off balance, I still sat in the office for a long time, staring at the monitor screen, but seeing nothing in front of him except a feeling of utter betrayal. I found out through family rumors that my parents were forced to use their retirement savings to cover their credit card debt. Later, Aunt Susan told me that they also took out a second mortgage on their house because they didn't have enough money anyway, and one day I received a notification in the mail that they had sold some family heirlooms, my grandmother's porcelain set, an antique ring that my mother had promised to give me. Part of me felt guilty, but the other part was angry because they had put themselves in this position. They didn't want to see the truth. They didn't want to admit that their beloved daughter had made a terrible choice. They were just looking for another way to make me pay for everything. One evening, when I was about to go to bed, there was a sudden knock on the door. I frowned at the camera screen as Kate, James' sister, stood in the doorway. We met at Amy's wedding, but we weren't really that close. "I know it's late," she said when I opened the door, looking a little embarrassed but determined. "But I need to talk to you." Curiosity got the better of me, and I motioned for her to come in. Kate sat down on my couch, crossed her arms over her chest, as if gathering her thoughts, then took a deep breath and looked at me with serious, tired eyes. "I want you to know that you're right," she said calmly. I was silent, giving her a chance to explain. "You're right not to help them." She smiled bitterly. "I mean, James has been struggling with gambling since college. Our parents helped him out countless times, but it never worked. It only allowed him to keep playing." "Did Amy know?" I asked, feeling a mixture of rage and sadness flare up inside me. Kate nodded, her eyes heavy. I knew. She thought she could fix him. I chuckled. And instead of this, Kate looked down at her clasped fingers. Instead, he dragged her into it, too. My lips pressed into a thin line. They've been to casinos all over the country, she continued. James said that he had a system, that it was an investment, and, at first Amy believed him. And then she started playing too. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to process what I just heard. Our parents lost their beach house paying off its debts 2 years ago, Kate said, her voice hardening. And now your parents are in the same boat. I nodded, feeling strangely empty inside. This needs to stop, Kate said, standing up. I walked her to the door, nodded, but didn't answer. After Kate left, I sat in the dark living room for a long time, thinking about patterns of behavior, about how love can blind us to the truth, about how our parents always relied on Amy, putting her above me. She was their ideal daughter, pretty, sociable, married young, the one who supposedly succeeded. Now their golden child had ruined their world, but they still couldn't figure out that throwing money at a problem wasn't going to solve it. The next day, I did something that I had been thinking about for a while. I have studied support groups and treatment centers for gambling addiction. I gathered all the information into an email and sent it to my parents, Amy and James. I have included the contact details of financial advisors specializing in debt management and bankruptcy laws. Solve your problems by yourself. Mom answered a few minutes later. We don't need it. We need you to help your family. I closed the mailbox. Deleted the email. She didn't answer. A year has passed since that fateful Christmas dinner that changed everything. During this time, I've learned more about family dynamics and personal boundaries than I ever wanted to know. I also learned that sometimes the most difficult decisions are the right ones. I followed the family situation through relatives and mutual friends. Mom and Dad were eventually able to pay off their credit card debt. But it cost them their entire pension. Comfort. They had to sell their house and move to a smaller apartment. Both took part-time jobs to supplement their reduced retirement income. But not once, did any of them admit that I was right. Amy and James filed for bankruptcy. They lost their house and moved into a small apartment, much more modest than the one in which they had once planned to raise their future children. The last I heard, they finally agreed to attend anonymous player meetings, even though it only happened after they hit rock bottom. Kate, James' sister, told me that their lives are now a series of ups and downs. Sometimes they manage to stay afloat, sometimes they break down again, but at least they are trying to get out. Your mom asked about you at church, Aunt Susan once told me during one of our rare phone conversations. She misses you. I held my breath for a moment when I heard these words, but then, unexpectedly for myself, I honestly confessed. I miss her too. It was the truth. I miss my family, not the people they became when money got involved, but the people they used to be. I missed Sunday dinners where there were no expectations or demands, when we just laughed, argued about movies, and shared our plans for the future. I miss my younger sister, who used to call me for any reason, work advice, book recommendations, discussing the series that we both watched. I missed my parents, who were proud of me for who I was, not for what I could give them. But I didn't miss the guilt, the emotional blackmail, the constant demands disguised as requests. I didn't miss the way I was treated like an ATM with legs. I didn't miss how my generosity was taken for granted and then turned into a duty when I refused. My life has changed in unexpected ways since I set strict boundaries with my family. I've moved up the career ladder because I've finally focused my energy on work and professional growth, rather than endlessly solving other people's problems. I strengthened old friendships that I had once put on the back burner because all my free time was consumed by family commitments. I even started dating again. When your life is reduced to an endless sense of responsibility for others, you just don't have time for yourself. Now I had it. And then, last week, I got a letter from my mom. Unlike her previous posts, there were no requirements in this one. There was something about him that I hadn't expected at all. Apologies. No, it wasn't perfect. She was still trying to justify some of her actions, explaining them with concern, parental anxiety, and the fact that she was simply afraid for the future of our family. But in this letter, for the first time in all this time, there was a confession. We were wrong. We took advantage of your generosity and overlooked what is really important. We've lost you. I didn't answer right away. I took my time. Now it was up to me to decide what kind of relationship I wanted to have with my family, and on what terms. Now I knew that I could love them, but not let them use me. Now I knew that I could take care of them, but not be responsible for them. Last night, while looking through old photos, I came across one taken on the last Thanksgiving, before everything fell apart. In the picture, we all looked so happy, discussing our future European trip, laughing, making plans, not even suspecting what this vacation would lead to, how quickly it would split us apart. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had given up then. If I had just paid for this trip, would it have prevented a disaster at the casino? Or would it just be another step in a chain of connivance that would inevitably lead us to the same ending? But then I remember what my therapist told me. You are not responsible for other people's choices. You can only be responsible for your own. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I make my own choice. I live my own life. I'm finding peace with the fact that sometimes the best thing you can do for the people you love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. The money that I used to send to my parents now goes into my own retirement account. I am sending part of these funds to a charitable foundation that helps families affected by gambling addiction. Sometimes the best way to help others is to make sure that you yourself are standing on solid ground.